The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap.
On today's episode, Trident Room host Captain Deja Treese sits down with Lieutenant Colleen Wilmington.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Trident Room podcast series. I'm your host, Captain Deja Treese, and with me today is Lieutenant Colleen Wilmington, who is a METOC officer here at the Naval Postgraduate School. Thank you for joining us. What is METOC? That has been the question amongst the podcast members for weeks, if not months now, and we're finally here sitting down with an official METOC officer to talk about it. So before we get into that discussion, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a brief overview of your career timeline?
Absolutely. So Lieutenant Colleen Wilmington, I commissioned through the University of Kansas, ROTC, back in 2015. I commissioned as a Surface Warfare Officer METOC option. And so what's important about that is that not only set it to where I went to a aircraft carrier or an amphib, our big decks first instead of a cruiser or destroyer, and it secured my lateral transfer to meteorology after I earned my surface warfare pin. So I went to USS Nimitz, based out of Bremerton, Washington, for my first tour. I was the deck division officer, so small boats, anchors, non-skid, paint the side of the ship sort of stuff. Not really doing a lot of the meteorology, oceanography, but there are 04 METOCs on board the big decks, whether attached to the ship itself or attached to the admiral's staff. And so we're able to learn from them, and that's our first mentorship opportunity right out the bat. So I did qualify as surface warfare, and I laterally transferred in 2018. My first METOC job was at the Naval Oceanography Anti-Submarine Warfare Center in Yokosuka, Japan. So out there, we're not only doing resource protection, so telling what the weather is, but we're also doing anti-submarine warfare. So we go out on the ships attached to the destroyer squadron, and we support them with all things anti-submarine warfare. Excuse me. From there, I went to the National Ice Center out of Suitland, Maryland. I was there for just under 3 years, and now I'm here at the Naval Postgraduate School. So, very diverse METOC career already, but that is one of the things about METOC, which I still haven't defined it, which is Meteorology and Oceanography, and that's it. And it's not necessarily officer, because we very much depend on our aerographers' mates, our AGs, to do a lot of the subject matter expertise. We depend on our civilians who may have been in the military, may not have been, but have that expertise and have really honed their craft to support the fleet.
Okay. Thank you for that. And just as an Army officer myself, I'm always fascinated with the different jobs and the unique skill sets, within the different branches, DOD. And so for the non-Navy listeners out there, METOC stands for Meteorologist.
Meteorology and Oceanography.
Meteorology and Oceanography. Okay. And can you give a one-liner of what you all do?
So Naval Oceanography is part of the information warfare community. So what we do is we collect data across the spectrum from the seafloor to the upper atmosphere, and we analyze it. We use it to do exploitation, to do forecasting, to provide services, whether it's special forces, mine laying, precise time, ice with the Ice Center. It's really broad spectrum of work that we're doing.
Yeah. And then can you just briefly describe or explain what the chain of command looks like, or what encompasses a METOC section or operations cell? I don't know the right terminology, but...
Exactly. So there are 14 tenant commands that are all under Navy Meteorology and Oceanography Command out of Stennis, Mississippi. So what that is, so not only ours is, we'll call it CINMOC, which is Commander, Naval Meteorology and Oceanography Command, but it's also a Maritime Operations Center. So you also see it as CTG 80.7. So it's just a commander task group. And what that does is it makes it to where we are a ready resource to the fleet around the world. What do you need? You need this bathymetry data. You need this hydrography data. You need this typhoon track.
Yeah.
And everything goes through the MOC, the CTG 80.7, and gets distributed and tasked out to our commands around the world.
Okay, and then so during my just initial Google search, if you will, of what a METOC is, I stumbled upon the joint publication 3-59, which is the Meteorological and Oceanographic Operations, and it talked about how METOC operations is divided into two key functions, characterization, and then you touched on the exploitation. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that and how it shapes the training and the operational environment?
So that characterization is really looking at, where are we going? Where is the evolution, the exercise taking place? Okay, so start with my climatology. Now I'm going to look at, break it down. What equipment am I taking out there? What am I going out there with the helo? Am I going out there with fixed wing aircraft? Am I expecting landing forces? And breaking down, okay, what are my capabilities? Where are they operating? Do we need EM spectrum data? What time of the year are we going? So going back to the climate, am I worried about big storms? Am I worried about low tides? Am I worried about reefs? Do I have data about this? And then it's taking all of that and providing it to our commander that we're supporting. And so as folks leaving the Naval Postgraduate School, we're expected to not only have that idea of, hey, where do all of these different products come from, but now I have an idea, more insight on maybe one or another that was, the central focus of my thesis, and I can, better provide for those commanders.
Okay, thank you for that. I feel like your job is tough in the aspect that, like, you're always going off, like, preparing for the unpredictable, but, like, utilizing prediction, like, all of your tools. And I guess in my mind, I feel like that can be a little bit challenging in a way.
Well, hopefully it's not unpredictable, because then we're probably not doing our job the best that we can. But right. So what we want to do is we want to, the thought that's in my head, that old cartoon movie robots, see a need, fill a need. Yeah. So that's really where the METOC step in, is, how can we better use our environment to support this evolution, this exercise? So we can balance our risk and our objectives for the best possible outcome.
Yeah, and then just touching back on, your introduction, I want to hear more about your experience during your time at the Naval Ice Center. And through my Google search, there was an article, like, it was your face, like, just first thing that popped up, which was really cool to read. But it just talked about your experience when you were the officer in charge of a meteorological team to support the Navy's ice exercise. And so could you just explain the overall mission of the Naval Ice Center? Is it mainly to test the capabilities of the Navy within the Arctic region, or geared towards, like, the study and the trends of the Arctic environment?
Really, neither.
Oh.
The Naval Ice Center, National Ice Center, is a tri-agency organization composed of Navy, Coast Guard, and NOAA personnel, and really what they're doing is providing global to tactical scale ice products and forecasting to support anyone who's going into the ice, whether that's cruise ships, whether that's submarines, whether that's planes, and really letting them know, where the ice is, using what products, what forecasting models we have to let them know, where we think the ice is going to be, where it's receding, working with the Coast Guard and the Iceberg Patrol, so that we can let these ships know what to expect when they're in the ice. The National Ice Center / Naval Ice Center there's only about 50 people there, and most of them are civilians. And so what their task really is providing that operational product to those who are going into the ice, whether that's in the Great Lakes, whether that's the Arctic, whether that's Antarctica. And they're the only ice center in the world that actually provides that global coverage and global analysis.
Yeah.
Most ice centers around the world only look at what's in their economic exclusive zone or what's on their coast. So we're the only ones who look at the world as a whole.
Yeah, wow.
As far as research goes, because there's only 50 of them, a lot of that research is actually completed by universities. It's completed by NOAA research groups, NSIDC, which is the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And so then we take a lot of that data and then turn it into an operational product.
It's awesome. Awesome information. And then can you explain, like, I guess, what an ISEX is and what your day-to-day operations were during that time?
So ISEX now is actually run by the the Undersea Warfare Development Center. And so the big name that you'll see is the Arctic Submarine Laboratory out of San Diego. And it's a biannual exercise. They go up every other year to test the equipment and test capabilities, really to provide better support for submarines. So I went up with a team. I had 2 aerographers mates from Fleet Weather Center Norfolk, master ice analysts from the National Ice Center. And we basically split our team into 2. So there were 2 of us on the ice at all times. So we got up there about Valentine's Day, and I came off the ice March 23rd.
And then when you say on and off the ice, can you kind of explain, I guess, to put like a picture in people's heads?
So what it is we go up to Dead Horse, Alaska, kind of our base of operations. And it's an oil field, basically, and that's all that's there. Nobody lives there. It's a camp. It's the end of the Dalton Highway. You can start in southern Alaska. Ice road truckers, super familiar with Dalton Highway. Yeah, so we're at the very end of it. Well, then ISEX finds an ice flow within 200 nautical miles of Dead Horse, and we establish a working camp there. We have to be within 200 miles in order for helos to make emergency evacuations, fuel and whatnot. But it could be anywhere in that region, and so if you look at a map, that's a lot of area. Like you really could be like from Barrow, Alaska, all the way into Canadian territory. So our job from the NIC was to find a multi-year ice flow. So that's ice that survived more than 2 summers, basically. So theoretically, it's thicker. Multi-year ice is you could melt it and you could drink it. Where first-year ice is very, very salty still.
Okay.
So you don't want to drink it without some filters and whatnot. But you need first-year ice for the planes to land on, because first-year ice is smoother. It hasn't been beaten up by the winters, and it's ridged and it's rough. So finding a spot that's capable of hosting both of those things, it's over a very broad area, and you don't want it to drift into more active areas over the course of the camp, so that it will survive for the duration of camp.
Yeah.
So once we got up there, when we send out pioneering flights, went out, they ran sleds over the ice to see how thick it was. Wow. We actually found a campsite, took equipment out, and we were watching what weather we could. And we said, hey, looking at everything, there's some strong weather coming through, and we might go into blizzard conditions. And we did. And so we hunkered down in the hotel for a day. Thankfully, it was a smaller blizzard. But then when we got out and we went back up to look at how the camp had survived, it had fractured along the runway. Wow. And so now our runway was no longer viable. So we had to retrieve our gear and start over.
Oh, man.
And that's really what we were up there for, is to let them know these are the conditions that we're looking at for the for the aircraft. these are the conditions that we're looking at for how fast the current is going, so we know, what tonals are going to work for our acoustics, where we might drift along the current, and just doing that constantly. So I was up on watch from 06 to 2200, and that was my shift.
Yeah.
And then even after that shift, I was calling the National Weather Service, Alaskan Aviation Department, to find out what they were seeing, so that I could make sure that my team that was back in Dead Horse knew what weather was coming into them, because if the planes couldn't leave Dead Horse, then nobody was coming out to support us.
Wow.
And so then we needed to shift our operations for the day.
Yeah. And so I guess, how long, what was the duration of being isolated on the ice, if you will?
So we established camp, I think, around February 23rd, and I was one of the last groups off, except for the core Arctic Sublab folks. And so it was about a month.
Wow.
We only were delayed 4 or 5 days with the blizzard that came through and finding another flow.
Yeah.
Which, because we were watching it, we're like, hey, watch our options, and whatever survives is where we'll go.
Yeah.
Go out and make sure it's good, but
what,
you still have to do a lot of that, running the sleds and everything.
Yeah. And what other challenges aside from the weather did you all face out there? Because I imagine being just in the Arctic environment is way different than being like on the mainland, if you will.
So you have communication. So we were out there with Iridium satellites. So we were depending on those really to have more consistent comms back, but those are limited still. You still have to have coverage from the satellite. You have to have enough data to cover messages going back and forth. Whether or not the planes are going to land, because there were multiple times the planes flew out and then couldn't land.
Wow.
And turned around and went back home. And so whatever was on that flight, whether it was people, whether it was equipment, whether it was food, we have to wait another day.
Yeah.
The cold was there, obviously, but you don't, we even actually saw a positive 20-degree day, and we were expecting negative 45 for most of it. So then that added stress to all of us. That's adding advection fog and more air. How is this going to affect the ice flow itself? Are we going to see more active movement? But you're out there by yourself with whatever you can.
You came out there with.
Well, you came out with there with. We saw 3. So I got to be part of the testing crew for ARC-X, which is just the practice exercise a year before.
Okay.
Where it's primarily they test everything on the lake first, and then we go out to the sea ice. So one of the things I got to see when I was up there for ARC-X was how they plan to move the tents in the event that we had a fracture at camp, which has happened before in the past. And they made it to where we basically just hook up the tents to the snowmobiles, and you drag the tent and move. That happened 3 times while we were there, to include one that actually went under my rack. We traced the crack the next morning, and I was like, that is underneath my rack. We need to move this tent. Let's go. But it made it to where we were able to stay there longer. We didn't have to scrap operations with the first fracture. You have to, so like I said, multi-year ice you can melt down, but you can also just drill through the ice and use an osmosis machine and get your fresh water that way. Well, if you run out of gas, if the hole freezes up, if the tubing, whatever you're using, breaks, if the heater that you put in the hole to keep it there goes out, you just start over again. And so you're already in those cold conditions, and you're trying to do a lot of these operations. And so you really just have to be mindful of how long have I been out here? What, can I take breaks, or does this have to be really consistent going? Can I call for help and get someone else out here so we can take shifts in doing this? But because you're up there and there were only 60 people on the ice at any time, you really learn how to work as a team. Nobody is above emptying the latrine. Nobody is above doing food prep, and nobody's above, loading and unloading the planes as they come in. It's one team, one fight.
Yeah. Oh, man. And then just my final question, based on your experiences, your research, and just your gained knowledge, how is the Arctic geopolitically and strategically important to the Navy or DoD?
The Arctic is geopolitically and strategically important because as the ice recedes and grows, because we have seen a shift over time of that ice not reaching the expanses that we expect it to, but we've also seen changes in thickness. We've seen changes in volume. We've seen changes in composition. But if the ice recedes far enough, that opens up trade routes. So then it's contested, whether it's, planting flags at the bottom of the ocean and declaring ownership over over the seafloor, whether it's watching as more biologics come into the Arctic, and that becomes a new fisheries area. Cruise ships going through. All of those activities, because the Arctic is still changing, we don't know for sure how it's going to change. We don't know, the ice might not go as far, but it could be deeper. Mm-hmm. It could be denser. There could be more wildlife in the ice, depending on the ice. And then you have to watch out for those. And we're recording mammal strikes, and which hopefully don't happen. But we're not as familiar with operating in that environment. Mm-hmm. So the Navy is going to become more important in those environments because we don't have a lot of experience right now on the surface. Most of our experience is subsurface and research. And the Navy doesn't have an icebreaker. All of our icebreakers are owned by the Coast Guard. Mm. Most of them are deployed in the Great Lakes. Yeah. There are only really 2 medium and heavy icebreakers that go to the poles, and that's the Healy and the Polar Star, both of which are very old for ships that are going into that hazardous condition and breaking through the ice instead of trying to avoid the ice. Yeah. Which is what most ships are doing, is trying to avoid the ice. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for answering all of my questions. Was there anything else that you want to bring up or highlight about METOC? It sounds like a very fascinating job. I mean,
it's the fact that we all come through the Naval Postgraduate School not only gives us a more camaraderie. We don't all come through the postgraduate school. I should clarify. We're split between MIT, Woods Hole, and NPS. But all of our officers go through one of those 2 institutions. But what that gives us is a focus for our thesis on, theoretically, for something that we saw as a junior officer, and we said, hey, this is a problem, we want to fix it. Or I know I'm going to be doing this. Let me see if I can change this situation. Yeah. And having that under your belt and then going back to the fleet and being ready to better support is phenomenal.
Yeah. Thank you so much again. We will see you all in the next episode.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. For more information about today's guest and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room podcast has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/tridentroompodcast.